Refining is coming in 3.12, and historically, there's been a lot of speculation about what refining even means. But now that we're seeing the initial implementation, I think this has gameplay implications beyond the obvious selling of raw ore and the hooking in of the cargo trading. So let's talk about what other influences this potentially opens or closes for Star Citizen. To set the stage, this is not pure theory crafting around the refining, but it's more of an analytical walkthrough that makes reasonable projections into deeper levels of gameplay based on some currently known facts. For people that follow Star Citizen closely, a lot of basics are already known around refining, but let's hit a few of those fundamentals so we have a basis for this extended discussion. First, there's the selling of the raw ore to the kiosks at the refineries. Now, before folks get too carried away, I'm not going to talk about the prices of raw ore, the refining costs, the time it takes to refine, and the value of the refined ore, because all those values are subject to change, and probably will change as the game undergoes more balancing in the area of economics. Right now, they're just trying to get functionality into the game and get it working. As more economic gameplay activities come online, dynamic economies get in place, and just general usage of game features, CIG will adjust all these kinds of values. For people that have followed my channel, they know I rarely talk about the specifics of weapon damage and things like that in any detail, because it's just not a great basis for making decisions and coming to conclusions. So, what are we getting about this refining that is solid information? There's a few nuggets that stuck out to me as key items that influence other aspects of gameplay. One is that when you drop off your raw ore and submit it for a refining job, it's not an instantaneous process, and it's going to take some time. And thankfully, the way they have it set up is that these refining jobs persist, meaning you can log out and your job should continue to run in the background until you log back in. That time also varies depending on the kind of ore you have and which refining process you choose. And the yield of that refined ore also varies with those same factors. So let's talk about some extensions of what's been presented in this initial implementation. You've run a refining job, it finishes, and you come back later to want to transport the refined ore. Does this mean, and I'm speaking purely as long-term plans, that the ore you refine is held exclusively for you? Or does this mean the refined ore is another type of commodity that cargo haulers can move just like anything else and have access to? On one hand, I like the idea that the ore I've worked hard at acquiring and refining is held exclusively for me to continue into that cargo running activity. But I'm not sure that makes a whole lot of sense in the big picture. What if I only bought one ship in game, and that's the prospector? Sure, I won't be able to move the refined ore that I sold off, but what happens to the ore I did refine? Does it just sit there forever at the refinery until someday when I might want to buy or rent a ship capable of moving it? And what about the opportunities for other players? Will my org mates be able to continue the second half of this hooked together gameplay between mining and trading and move the goods off to be sold while I return to mining the fields to get more ore? And forget about just being in an org. There's a lot of solo players out there, and many like the idea of being a space trucker. I don't think we can always assume that the same player will always do both the mining and refining with the subsequent hauling. Some will just want to mine, others will just want to haul, and some will want to do both. Wouldn't it make sense for there to be another kind of commodity that can be bought and traded like anything else? This higher reward cargo run of refined ore might come at a higher risk, as these trade routes would be pretty well known and be great spots for pirates, as demonstrated by Tony Z about a year ago. But I can see all this being a kind of catch-22. If you make it exclusive to the individual, or possibly open up to people in your party like for folks in your org, then it eliminates the ability for others to be able to jump into this mining to refining to trading game loop. If they make it open to anyone being able to acquire and move this ore, then it becomes less likely that a person or org can rely on any inner gameplay loop between the mining and cargo hauling so they can keep the entire haul all to themselves. I'm not super clear what they have planned for this in the long term, so I don't want to harp too much on exactly how it works right now while it's being tested, or even in the initial live implementation. Don't get me wrong, I really like the refining gameplay being added, and plan to talk even more about it in this channel, about the kinds of gameplay it opens, but I would like to hear a little bit more about what they have planned in the handoff of ores between the miners and the traders. So let's talk now about the influence of the different refinery proficiencies that they talked about. Different refineries will be better at refining certain types of ore than other refineries. So let's say there's a really great refinery for gold over at ArcCorp. With the game designers knowing this is the best place in Stanton for gold to be refined, how will it influence where gold is most likely to be found? Will the moons around the planet of ArcCorp be rich in gold to allow easy transportation back and forth to the refinery? Or will CIG make players work a little harder?
Look hard.
For those that want to try to sell their ore for refining? Will the highest concentrations of gold maybe be found somewhere around Microtech, on the other side of the solar system? I started off this video by saying I'm not going to talk about the prices around the ores in the refining process, because I'm sure all that is in flux. I'm just going to assume that in the end, a miner will get a little extra reward for traveling to a refinery than selling it at the closest location, which means it makes the most sense for gold to be found in its greatest abundance and percentages as far away as possible from this exampled gold refinery at ArcCorp. That way, there's a reward for the extra time and risk of travel, versus a slightly lower payout for selling it someplace nearby, like right around Microtech, where you found the gold.
Someone from accounts, please contact management. Accounts, contact management. Thank you.
This is one of the game design things I'll be looking forward to testing out. Does the location of a given refinery's expertise influence where certain commodities are found? We could even extend this to other systems like Pyro. Will some of the most valuable ores we currently have be moved to an entirely different system to increase that investment you have to make, not only for the product itself, but for the need to transport it a longer distance to a given refinery? Which leads me to a final game design around the removable saddlebags. I think this might be where that trade-off between the miner and the cargo runner really comes together, and that the current implementation isn't a good representation of where this game activity is going to go. Yes, that question still needs to be resolved for the person who's running their prospector solo and wants to complete both the mining activity and the movement of the raw ore to the refinery themselves. But the removable saddlebags introduces a lot more options. We've known that the saddlebags will be detachable and movable by other ships for transport. At least, that's what we've been led to believe so far. With that being the case, a whole new type of contract probably needs to come into place to facilitate the exchange of the ore's value to the recipient of the saddlebags. It's most likely the case that this introduces yet another tier of ore value into this whole mining operation. A miner operator can opt to travel a greater distance and spend more time to sell their ore to a refinery for processing, or can sell it for a lesser value at some appropriate trade location, or sell their saddlebags of ore to a cargo runner who will do all the legwork of transportation and selling at the trade-off of a lesser value for the commodity. Now, I know there's a whole host of questions that immediately come up about this whole exchange or saddlebag concept. How do you get replacement bags? How much do they cost? You're introducing the risk of being pirated for your bags of ore, and how can that risk be minimized? Those are all great questions, but ones we can't answer right now. All we do know is the saddlebags will be exchangeable and can be moved independently of the mining ship, which, in that case, unlocks that little dilemma we have about how exclusive delivered ore might be between the miner and the trader. It doesn't need to be. It's simply an open commodity that's sold and bought from the refinery like any other. And any org gameplay for that inner loop around mining and refining I talked about involves this transport concept of the saddlebags. Also, at that point, we've actually introduced a little bit of a miner career for a player. It's a niche for certain ships. A player with an appropriate ship, like the new Nomad, could specialize in moving saddlebags from mining ships to the refinery and submitting them for processing. It's got a nice open cargo bay and will also have a tractor beam, which seems like an ideal setup to be able to drag in several of those bags into the bay and go deliver. The Nomad then isn't just some generic cargo ship. It's more of a dedicated ore runner, something that may not be particularly well suited for other ships like the Star Runner. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and something that I'm going to explore in more detail on another video. And don't forget to check out the Readcast podcast, available at the link in the description.